I will begin by the roll call. Okay, myself, Gina Barrows, Lloyd.
Here.
Joel Gross, not here. Merrill LaVoy.
Here.
Michelle Lopez. Jan Peterson. Del T. Here. And this person, Sumish. Okay. Okay, today's agenda is the New York City Planning Support Team. Mr. Nicholas Stamper will give a presentation on the capital budget request process called Budget Request 101 Walkthrough. And we will be able to ask questions. Hi. We will have an opportunity to ask questions after the presentation. Okay, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect, thank you. Does anybody, do we feel like we need the microphone? Does that help for your sound, for video or whatever?
Oh, I'm just using the phone, so probably.
Okay, I will, let's see if, I've had not the best luck with microphones in the past. The last one of these I gave, it died about 6 times in the middle of the presentation, so. Okay, does that sound all right? I'll try not to destroy any eardrums while I'm here. Okay, well, thank you all so much for having me. I want to start by giving a sincere thank you to you all and to Brooklyn Community Board 1 sort of in general for reaching out to our team this year to partner sort of more in depth on your approach to your district needs process. You are the first board to be so proactive in engaging with us on this process, and I guess I appreciate the introduction, Gina. I guess I'll fill in some additional detail. My name is Nick. I'm a program manager on our capital planning and support team. Amongst other duties, our team is responsible for sort of shepherding the community district needs process every year, that all boards are sort of required to submit these district needs statements and these budget requests. And though it is a charter requirement, it's often no one's favorite thing to do every year. It can often be a big hassle to produce all that content, and we're very thankful that we've got board partners that work so hard on that content. We do our best to be as available as possible to support, to provide additional capacity to boards that want to spend some more time and resources on their district needs statements to try to build a more robust needs assessment kind of planning process out of that charter requirement. And so very happy to be here, very happy that you guys sort of took us up on our offer to help whoever was interested. Happy to have a taker. So today, like Gina mentioned, I'll be talking about community board budget requests specifically. The presentation sort of in 4 parts, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, comments, what have you. So we'll start with a brief process overview, kind of to give context, table setting for the entire process. We'll talk a little bit about the budget request portion of that specifically. We'll get into some best practices when you're creating and managing your budget request list, and then also talk about some additional resources available to the boards that you might want to take advantage of. So let's jump right in. So our process overview. So the district needs process, as you're all aware, is a charter mandate for the boards. DCP's role is really a product of our own charter mandate to assist boards in their planning activities. And so while Lucia is here to help you with all of your sort of borough office concerns and a lot of your land use and zoning considerations, our team is in a much more, I suppose, specialized role in these district needs process, trying to make sure you have the tools available to you to create and submit that district needs statement and budget request every year. And in doing so, we really want to make sure we're not just there to sort of push buttons and keep the lights on, but that we make this process as valuable as we can, recognizing that we're only one cog in this as well, along with our board partners, along with OMB and the other agencies. We want to do our best to make sure that you all feel like your district needs are being heard. So we take all of that content you submit, we run our own analyses and spend really this part of the year we're in right now going around to all of our agency partners to present to them on what we've heard from the boards for the past year, do a lot of sort of packaging info and data for them to help them learn from what are the community boards saying about their own needs. We're hearing these perspectives on community needs right from the source, and our team wants to make sure that those things we're hearing are getting delivered back to the people that can then use it in their own work. So that is sort of one of our various goals here. So this process is a combination of 2 charter mandates, actually. We have the district needs statement on one hand and the budget request on another hand, that sort of over the years have been scooped into under one umbrella that we call CB needs, the community district needs process. On the one hand, the district needs statements give us a really great insight into really the narrative of your community, of what your perspective is on the major issues you're facing, how those issues specifically relate to your community in contrast to maybe other districts in the city. And then the budget requests are sort of where the rubber meets the road. So we've heard about what needs the community has, and then the budget requests ask that agencies find funding in their budget to accommodate, to find a way to address the needs that were just addressed here. So they kind of fit together in that way. This is an outline of needs, and this is a list of specific requests to agencies to help meet these needs. And so they all come in together in one big package. So we collect a lot of different data as part of this process, and it is an annual cycle on which we are collecting all of this data. So in your district needs statement, you've got these various components: your community district overview, general overview of the district, and district background, your top 3 pressing issues in the district, a most important issue across 7 different policy areas, some needs categories that are even more specific than those policy areas, and then of course the budget requests. And so all of these different types of data are different ways that we can hear your board's voice about what your top issues are, and take that data and repackage it back to the agencies to say, we're noticing trends in the top 3 pressing issues in these areas, and this might be an area you want to reach out to that board and talk to them a bit more about because of the change they made in their most important issue selection, whatever the case may be. So we, as I mentioned, we track this sort of year over year as the boards make their submissions. We tend to reach out at the start of May to sort of kick off a New Year's cycle, even though it's quite far in advance of the submission deadline. We want to make sure that you all have our attention for as much time as possible with the form open, so that whatever needs you might have from us in terms of capacity, support, and assistance, we can provide that for you. The form typically opens at the start of June. At least for the last several years, we've been trying to move it back to give you all more time working in the online form to update your submissions. Through the summer, a lot of boards go on recess, come back to the OMB Borough Budget Consultations, and eventually submit on the October 31st deadline. Following which, all of the agencies then respond to budget requests. Those budget requests get published by OMB in the preliminary budget register, and we start the cycle all over again. Part of, and I'll mention specifically here about the calendar cycle, this is sort of the formal milestones in the calendar. One of the things that we're most excited about with working with your board is your interest in kind of where can we add on to the things that are formally part of the process to give some extra sort of juice to that submission. How can we spend more time throughout the year rather than, unfortunately, the way it often happens where there's a touch point between agencies and boards towards the end of the year when the submission goes in, and then the agencies don't follow up with the board or vice versa, and you do it all again the next year. How do we connect those dots? How do we make sure that all those months in between are spent having those conversations about what needs were addressed last year, what needs weren't, what needs to be updated? How can we kind of bring it all full circle? So very excited to help you all with that. So budget requests specifically, we talked about those being sort of one half of the process. Budget requests, each individual budget request has a lot of different information in it. So the 3 main things you want to think about when you're picturing a budget request are, first, what type of request is it? Is it a capital request or an expense request? And we'll get into a little more detail on the difference there in the next couple slides. Then we've got the request itself. What agency are you asking to do something, and what are you asking them to do? And then finally, is it location specific? Is this our whole district needs better servicing from sanitation? The pickup schedule is insufficient for the whole district. Or is it this intersection has a flooding issue and we want to point you to this particular place in the district? And so with those things combined, we kind of put all those pieces together and we get one singular budget request. So on the type issue, capital expense versus expense request, actually borrowed this slide from one of my coworkers that does a great capital budget 101 on the whole budget cycle. Identifying a capital request is usually the easier one to figure out, because we have these rules for what items are capitally eligible. When you hear people talk about the capital budget, those are investments or expenditures that are typically the more expensive ones, the ones with longer lifespans, the things that you're investing in a road repair, you're investing in physical infrastructure, in some cases movable infrastructure. A fire truck would be considered a capital purchase because of how long it lasts for its useful life. The expense requests, on the other hand, are your programmatic requests,
how is an agency spending its operating budget? Do you need more staff at that agency to perform a certain task? That would be something that their operating budget would go to. So the capital side gets all of those big number items and long lifespan investments. The expense side is much more the programming, the organizational expenditures. An example here for some of those capital items, physical infrastructure, fire trucks like I mentioned, technology infrastructure. I think actually the technology infrastructure has a lower bar for how long it has to last, but to avoid the weeds, we'll not poke too deeply into the city's requirements for lifespan. But yeah, all of these things, when you think about our bridges, our roads, our sewer system, DEPs, assets, things like that, those are all in our capital portfolio and are the items that require the more money for things to last longer. So each individual budget request, when the board is in the submission portal, sort of managing their budget requests, creating new ones, editing, and deleting, they look like this, not with all the numbers, but we'll go to each of those one at a time. But you've got this budget request in sort of one block here, and this is a demo one we mocked up. So this is a request for a fake library facility on Main Street branch needs a new HVAC system. And so we're talking about a capital request. It's an HVAC. You're going to invest in a new HVAC for this facility that will hopefully last quite a long time, probably be a pretty expensive investment. And so the first thing we've got up top is the priority number. So boards are not just submitting a list of requests, but also rank ordering those. That actually is getting a bit of a tweak this year from your end of things. So we've long been hearing from boards that it is very difficult to get an entire board to agree on what the priorities should be 1 through 45 or however many you have. We've also heard from boards that part of the difficulty there is, let's say your transportation committee has a request they are really intense about a transportation need in their district, some traffic calming on a street or whatever it might be, and let's say your health and safety group have a different request they really care about. How are you supposed to decide whether transportation or health and safety are more important to you? It shouldn't be your job to decide whether one of those two things is a higher priority. So we wanted to respond to that feedback we got from boards, and so for this year, for the first time, boards will be able to prioritize their request by agency. So you'll tell DOT, here's my most important thing I'm sending DOT, here's my second most important thing I'm sending DOT, and the DOT requests don't have to compete with any other agency's requests for priority. So priority number will still be there though, and you can see that little arrow for dragging and dropping for reordering them. You've then got the title. This was a new thing we added last year because previously all of these, and if you've seen the budget register OMB puts out, they all come with a tracking number that is very confusing to look at or talk about. Not particularly helpful to anyone to say, hey, did you see my new budget request? It's 0301202617C. What? So instead we introduced a title. You could give it a short quippy title, in this case, Main Street Branch HVAC. You could say, did you see the request about the Main Street Branch Library HVAC? A lot easier, and when you're reordering them, you don't have to read the whole explanation to figure out which one you're moving up and down the list. Next, the request details. These are really, if you're in the program making your new request, this is sort of how you find which requests you're looking to create. You start with the policy area, and then you kind of narrow it down. So if I sat down saying, okay, library needs a new HVAC, how do I put that new request in? I start with parks, cultural, and other community facilities. I say it's a need for library services, it's for the New York Public Library, in your case, Brooklyn Public Library. The need is for library facilities, equipment, and programs, and we're gonna create a new or renovate or upgrade an existing facility. And so you kind of work your way through the logic to find exactly the request that you're looking for. You then fill out your explanation, explaining exactly what it is you're asking the agency to sort of consider the funding feasibility of. Then you get the agency response. If it's a request that you created previously in a prior year, the prior year's agency response is loaded in there for you to reference. And then there's a date stamp, which is another new feature we added recently, so that you can see if it's a request you loaded in a previous year, how long has it been there. Unfortunately, because that new feature was only created last year, we don't have the data going back further than that. Going forward though, you'll be able to see when you log in to manage your budget requests, this request I created 4 years ago and is still on my list. What's the deal? So that is, and then you've got an edit button and a delete button for when you're editing. Sure,
Just
yeah.
a quick question about that. Is that date gonna be tied to like the record ID or the title, or how does it reset?
Yeah, so try to not get, I spent way too much time thinking about how the back end works. So technically, each of these requests is being submitted as its own, like a survey response. You fill out all the questions, you hit submit, and it creates a new request. And so it's tied to that response. And so even if you came in and edited the text to say it's still a Main Street Branch HVAC request, but you wanted to update some of the explanation, it would stay with, it would know that that form was originally submitted on a certain date. You may have updated it later, but it's tied to the first time you clicked submit on that request.
Oh, this is all new.
As of last year.
As of
Yeah,
last year, okay.
Okay, so that's what a request looks like when you're managing it. Let's talk about some best practices. You're going to start your new requests or update your old requests. What do we want to keep in mind? So 4 main things that we usually tell folks to look at when they're creating or updating requests. First is to be direct. So some of these agencies are getting hundreds upon hundreds of requests, and they have frankly, not a whole lot of time to review them all. If the first line of your request says exactly what you're asking for, that's going to make that agency staff's job that much easier to start thinking about how to give an answer to your request. We've seen some boards will sort of bury the lead, and they'll develop a really nice explanation of why they need a certain thing, but the thing they're asking for is 7 lines down, and that's just more time that the agency is spending not quite sure what you're getting at. So start off with a direct statement, we're asking for this, and then you can give that additional detail below that. That's where the rationale comes in. Always helpful to connect the thing you're asking for to a need, especially if the agency staff responding has looked at your need statement and said, okay, they talked about how they had really poor street conditions in this part of the neighborhood. This request is getting at that need. Connecting those dots is helpful to sort of build the story for why you're asking for the thing you're asking for. Details such as location information for site-specific projects can be very helpful for agency staff in sort of, they're looking at all these requests that they got. Let's say they're all location-specific intersections that need repairs or whatnot. Being able to see those on a map, being able to overlay those with other work the agency's doing can be really helpful. And so filling out those location fields can help the agency down the line when they're trying to use that information you gave them to work that into their planning work. And then finally, keeping things refreshed. Year after year, we get a lot of repeat requests, and that makes a lot of sense. Not everything's getting solved in the space of a year, and frankly, the asking everyone to create new requests every year, especially for capital processes, which can often take much longer to fund and implement, we're expecting that those things are going to take longer than a year to get solved. However, some things do get done between one year submitting and the next year updating. And so always good to take a look through. Maybe the agency said, oh, great idea, we'll take care of that. That's a request you could remove. Or maybe the agency said, we could do the first half of this, but not the second half. You could go in and update it to make sure you take out the part they already said they could do. So there's always room to kind of freshen up what the submission is, so that every year the data the agencies are getting about what your needs are as current and up to date as possible. So what does a budget request look like in its final form? So here's a good example. We've got several more examples tucked in here we'll go over. This is from Bronx 7 a few years ago. This is a parks request, and so you can see we've got the priority number, the type is capital, it's going to Department of Parks and Recreation, we have the location, and it's a reconstruct or upgrade a park or amenity request. Fun fact, that's the most common request we get citywide. We were several hundreds of those, just that one type of request submitted this past year. And then the explanation says they need a full reconstruction of this bicycle and pedestrian path. They need reconstruction of the asphalt path and security lighting and sections of riprap. So they've done a really good job of explaining, like, these are the items I need the agency to put a dollar sign on and determine whether or not they have the money for those things. Some might say, so if we want to give some constructive feedback, you could split those requests into more than one request to say, request number 1 is for the pedestrian path, request number 2 is for the security lighting, and that way if the agency can do one of them but not the other, they can give you a clear yes on one and a clear no on the other, instead of trying to sort of split hairs and thread that needle. Some might also say you could include, if you had a Friends of the Park organization or something you worked with, you could list as a supporter. That's always helpful to know that there are multiple organizations in the community that have sort of rallied behind a particular need. But otherwise, a great level of detail, clear to see sort of what exactly the board is asking for. Some other requests from this year that did a pretty good job of sort of getting right to the point that I wanted to highlight. So here's one from Brooklyn 4. They said they wanted to establish, it was for DSNY, establish public drop-off sites where residents can bring unwanted electronics, textiles, food scraps, yard waste. It continued a little bit after that, but we can see that they sort of got right to the point. It's a great example of explaining exactly what you want the agency to consider funding. Similarly, Brooklyn 11 for DOT says funding is requested to increase lighting under the elevated tracks on Utrecht Avenue. Similarly, right to the point, you could go on and talk about, where did this need come from? What was the impetus for this request? But right up top, we know exactly what they want. Bronx 6 for DSNY, requesting additional sweepers. That again, it's a capital request. They're purchasing fleet equipment, so that's one of those movable investment requests. And then Bronx 9 for HPD, increased funding for HPD Housing Connect program. So that's an expense request that's going to a program that they're asking to receive increased funding rather than investment in a physical item. Here are 3 examples from Brooklyn 1 that were good examples worth highlighting from this past year. So these are three that you guys submitted last year. So the first one is a DFTA request to increase home care services and homebound meals funding, especially providing these services for frail and elderly following COVID-19 pandemic. So you can see first sentence, you guys did a great job of saying exactly what you're asking for, and then you gave more detail so that someone can understand, what is the situation that gave rise to this request. So we got both boxes checked there. This DOT request, more pedestrian space is needed for large and growing number of Greenway active users. And I actually excerpted a little bit out because you guys gave some great detail about kind of where and how those things were needed and for what purposes. But again, great job right up top of exactly what you wanted to ask for. And then lastly, this HPD request, reinstate funding. This is what we talked about in our last meeting. Reinstate funding for Greenpoint Williamsburg Tenant Legal Fund, et cetera, et cetera. Again, request is clear right up top. We obviously talked about, you heard from the agency, there were some issues with whether the agency thought that was something that they could fund, but they knew exactly what you were asking for, and that no fault of your own, that you gave a very clear request for what you were interested in and explained sort of the background for why you were interested in that.
Okay, that's good to know.
Some notes on these two, there's always room for improvement. This DOT request, a second request was sort of tucked into the end of this explanation, so I cut some out, but when you read further, it asked for one thing up top really clearly, and then asked for a second thing down at the bottom. Possible that DOT staff member was answering 200 requests that day and didn't catch the thing at the bottom that you were asking for also. So that could be made into its own request, it then gets its own response, it then gets its own sort of time dedicated to it that, who knows whether or not they caught that second thing that was being asked for in the bottom. The second one, this HPD request, was actually requested twice. So if you're HPD, maybe you're a little confused, you've got this once as a capital request, once as an expense request, maybe that creates some confusion about where are they imagining this happening or how are they imagining this happening. So that's a good note for when you're going to refresh items, avoid duplicates, things of that nature, especially for same agencies.
Oh, but sorry to cut you off,
Yeah.
for 14E, would you suggest that something like that, where it's $2 million, that would be a capital request, right? Instead of-
Yes, yeah, especially I think if this is, I guess just for a legal fund.
It seems like it was under an expense and a capital.
Yeah, I'm assuming that because this was part of a points of agreement of a neighborhood study, this was probably part of funding that was originally a larger capital program as part of that neighborhood rezoning. And so it was, that original fund was, I would guess, funded in part through capital funding. And so I think it would make sense for that price tag to be in a capital request. Also worth noting is, as much as we make the distinction between this is a capital, this is an expense request, the same person at that agency is gonna read that request, whether it be capital or expense. And so if you include it as a capital request and they think it's actually expense funding, that won't necessarily substantively affect their answer.
Thanks.
All right, so let's wrap up with some resources and then we can open for questions. So these are some data resources DCP manages that we also always love to plug for folks that are looking to add some data, some research, some backing to their requests, to their narratives. All sorts of different information we have available on our website depending on sort of what your question is. Let's say you wanted to know where to find your district needs statement. You could go to our Community District Profiles page, look at some other data for your district, and also find district needs statements going back a number of years. If you wanted to know where are all the schools in my district, we've got a facilities explorer where you could filter by type of facility and figure out, how are we getting, are there enough schools in this part of the district versus this part of the district? Where are the health facilities located? Things like that. If you wanted to know where commercial land is zoned in your district, you could ask Lucia, or you could go to Zola on our website. Yeah.
No, on the community district profiles,
Yeah.
notice that it's only updated through 2010.
Yeah.
Are there plans to get it up at least to 2020?
So frankly, I have been spending a lot of time asking people how we can get that updated. And right now, I have not been promised that that is up top of their priority list because of the recent updates to Population Fact Finder and our Equitable Data Development Explorer. Those are all up to date with the same data. And so they have not been as quick to come back to profiles, but I can assure you that I personally am working on getting that updated because I would also love to. I'm a huge fan of that
Because
tool.
we've had enormous population growth in
Yeah.
the district, so it doesn't really reflect the reality
Yeah.
of what's here now. So.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely heard, totally agree. And then Population Fact Finder, like I was just mentioning, that does have all that updated data, so not quite the same use, kind of user interface as the district profiles, but a great tool nonetheless for all of those demographic questions and other data that's housed in there. And then lastly, there is all of the support that our team offers. And so in addition to bespoke trainings like this, we have those data resources I just mentioned. Gathering public input, we have a survey that any board can take advantage of. I've already sent the information over to you guys a little while ago. Happy to re-up that for whoever's interested. It's one link. Anybody in the city can click that link and say, I'm in this district, and you fill out what you think your top 3 pressing issues in your district are, what you think your most important issues are, and then I send all of the data of what people are saying back to the board to say, here's what folks in your community have been saying about their top priorities, their top pressing issues, so that you can get, help gather that public input without necessarily having to do all the legwork yourself. Print materials, we've got flyer templates, social media templates, other things you might want to use to sort of help either spread the word about the survey or get the word out about any other district needs related public hearings, whatever you might be hosting. Analysis, we did a budget request walkthrough with you guys already. We
Yes,
read through the whole budget request list and kind of go one by one on notes and kind of what we see from our perspective. Always other forms of analysis available. Any questions you might have about how do things look for our request for a certain agency or over several years, we're happy to sort of splice up the data whatever way feels useful. And then training and tech support. We will be hosting more trainings this summer for our website, for the submission platform, to go over all the new features, to make sure that folks are reacquainted with the site. If obviously you haven't been in it for a number of months, you want to make sure you're ready to go when it's time to submit things. So we'll be hosting more of those in the summer, and are available for if anybody thinks, oh, I would love a training on budget request. Can somebody come speak to our committee? We absolutely can. So more than happy to find ways to work this into whatever you think would be most useful for your work. So thank you so much. That is all I've got. This is our team email that if you email the CD Needs distribution list, our whole CD Needs team gets that email for whoever's fastest to reply. I'm not sure it's officially a competition, but I try to win anyway, if possible. But absolutely reach out if you have any other questions, anything comes up at any point about the community district needs cycle. We are always on hand to help out. So thank you all so much and happy to take any questions.
Oh, thank you. That's good. You really covered a lot. Wonderful. I have a question
Yeah.
going back. The survey CD, this one,
This one?
gathering
Yeah.
public input. Now, how does that work exactly? How would we go about
Great,
doing that?
yeah, so we actually have 2 versions of it. I can go a little, so we have the print
Maybe
survey I
go with
mentioned, which
print.
is translated into all 10 of the citywide languages. That we only have in print version, and so you would have to hand those out and collect those on your own. But if you don't want to do the handing out, the collecting, the reading, and the tabulation, and everything, we give you the link to the survey and a QR code, whatever is most useful. You can send it to whoever you want. Put it on a newsletter, post it up around the neighborhood, whatever you want. So anybody in the city can go respond, and then I and my team will take all those results, count them up, and send you back a report on, and multiple reports kind of over time, like, hey, you got 30 more responses. Here's what it's looking like. People are saying their top issue is for transportation. Here's what people are saying their top housing issue is. So we will do all of the sort of analysis work for you to help you run that survey.
So we could do it within the district office.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, for example, Lewis, you would be able to do something like this in the district office.
And even if you wanted, we have, obviously this survey is helpful because we can run it for the whole city and whoever's interested can jump in. If you thought, I would love to get an idea from just our board members.
Yes, something like that.
And something like that, we could also do a bespoke survey for you to help kind of tailor it to your needs. You need not rely on just this one survey. We've got the survey technology there, happy to help sort of fill whatever gap you think would be most useful.
But if we wanted to use this survey, we could also share it with like our council people or other
Yeah.
electeds who send out newsletters and have them
Sure.
share it to people.
Yep.
That's
it'll
interesting.
just-
We could share it with the council.
Mhm.
Okay.
And
that
one
sounds-
link, anybody in the city, and the first question they get asked is to pick their borough and district, and then they'll all get asked what their top issues are across different areas. They've got an option to type in if they wanna give more detail on that. And yeah, anybody can use it, and we'll do all the work on the back end to make sure we tell you about just the Brooklyn Community District 1 responses.
Could, questions with respect to land use or even landmarks, could that be part of this? Could we?
It is included, yeah, so there's one of the policy areas is the housing, land use and economic development policy area, and so there's a section with questions devoted to, what's your top land use, housing, economic development issue? Please explain, and that's one of the sections too.
Because that's been my interest in how we could, I mean, not just my interest, everybody's interest in doing the outreach. to the
Yeah,
community.
absolutely. Yeah, just to sort of peek behind the curtain of a lot of this support stuff, when I came on a little over 2 years ago, there were a couple of these things that we could help folks out with, but we didn't really have a ton of people on this team to dedicate to building out this whole menu of options. And our goal was, we know that boards vary pretty widely on how many staff do you have, how much time does that staff have to dedicate to certain things. And we think that if we're here already spending all this time thinking about these processes, asking you all to do all the work to submit them every year, least we could do is find a way to help you do stuff that maybe you don't feel like you have the time or the staff to do on your own. You would love to run a survey, but who has the time in the day? There's only so many hours in the day. Let us run the survey for you, and we'll send you all the results. So yeah, happy to fill in. Yeah, Lloyd.
Thanks so much, Nick. Still on the survey topic, based off of what you and Lucia know of the community boards, which community board does the survey stuff best? And what could we learn from their approach to it?
A great question. I don't know a ton about how each board shared the survey around. Off the top of my head, I think the board that got the highest number of responses last year was Queens one. And so I don't know what their trick was for getting the word out there, but if I remember correctly, I think they had the biggest volume of responses.
And what was that number off the top of your head? Like a few hundred?
In the hundreds, yeah,
Okay.
in the hundreds. Oh, Manhattan won also. A lot of ones for each board. Yeah, Manhattan won also. They must have done something because I remember it was within 24 hours of them finding out about the survey, they had 100 requests or 100 responses come in. So they've got something up their sleeve one way or another.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
In regard to the response process, say, that per points of agreement from rezoning, was a park promised, hasn't been built, and we put that in there every year, but the response is, there's no budget for this, please take this off. And then, of course, we'll put it next year, but I just realized that there's something a little more, I don't know, maybe a productive, back and forth in terms of just going through this,
Yeah.
kind of repetitive motion. Putting on.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, and this is something we unfortunately hear from a lot of folks, and it's unfortunate in the sense that this should feel like a useful planning practice for everybody involved. It's to us at City Planning, and certainly I can speak for some of our sister agencies that use this data a lot, it could not be more valuable to get sort of geographically specific updates every year on what your needs are. Unfortunately, that does not mean that it works great as a part of the budget process, and no matter what the board asks for, and no matter how much the agency loves the idea, that we're not participatory budgeting, we don't have a pot of money set aside to pay for things, and so it always is a struggle where an agency might love the idea, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the funding to accommodate it. In certain cases, and it really does vary a lot agency to agency, which also not ideal. Parks is a good example of one where they've been really clear with us, and thankfully, I would love to hear more about your experience with Parks if you have any anecdotes. They have been really clear with us that they love this process, they love the info they get out of this process. They always feel, maybe remorseful is not the right word, but they're always stuck between a rock and a hard place because Parks doesn't have discretionary capital funds. They don't have a bucket of money that when they think of a good idea for a park improvement, they've got money ready to go spend on it. They have to, by project, go seek funding for each of those projects. And so I know anecdotally from other boards that have told me about this, that Parks will tell them, hey, can you please keep this on your list? Because we at Parks are trying to convince this council member or this other group to help fund this, and if you put it on your list again, or a higher priority, whatever it might be, we can then waive that as an additional sort of advocacy point to say, listen, Parks wants it, the board wants it, this community group wants it. So to your point, it is tough that this process is not really built to, you ask for a thing, you get a thing, is not, unfortunately, the way that it was constructed. It was constructed much more as a assessment of needs, and then the budget part of it kind of grew out of it over time. And I do still think that there's a lot of value to be had in the assessment of needs part. Unfortunately, the budget part can often just sort of lack the teeth for a lot of agencies who probably think a lot of their requests are great ideas and just don't have the wiggle room. And it is certainly frustrating, and a frustration we share with boards and agencies alike that is the process as it stands. And so we're hoping to inject as much value into the other parts of it so that the impact of that frustration is maybe lessened in comparison. Yeah.
So this is kind of related to what Steve was saying. A lot of times the response we get is agency does not support and won't fund remove request, and then they don't tell you why. Like it just says contact us for more details. So how do we refresh those requests? Because obviously those are things that we still think we need.
Yeah.
If we don't know why they're saying no,
Yeah.
how do we refresh that for the next year?
Yeah. It's a great question, and something we also have struggled a lot with. So first thing I'll say is that your budget request list is your list of priorities. You should have on your budget request list what your board thinks is a priority to be included in the budget. That is what makes this process useful for us, is when it is a genuine reflection of the community's needs. And so even if an agency does not love an idea, if the need is something that the community board and the community does need, that should be expressed in some way, shape, or form. So that's top line item. On the whether or not they're helping you out, we worked with OMB this past year to try to tweak some of the response mechanics to hopefully get some more detail out of the agencies across the board. And so one of the things we did is that last year was the first time that filling out an explanation box was required for every request. Unfortunately, that does not mean that every agency filled that explanation box out full of helpful information. And unfortunately, we saw that with a few agencies that, for reasons that I don't want to speculate on, they gave requests that were more akin to, or exactly like, please contact us for more information. Other agencies spent a lot of time saying this project is in this stage of funding, or this funding was allotted to this other thing, and so we love this, and so it is a struggle of like what parts we can control, and then the inability to, if I could sit looking over the shoulder of everybody at every agency as they responded and tap them and say, hey, is the board gonna find that helpful when they read it in the spring? I would love to. Unfortunately, we've yet to come up with something more than sort of making it a requirement, and hopefully we can continue to, like I mentioned at the top, we go around this time of the year to talk to all the agencies about what we learned from this past year. And so we tell them, like, here is how you responded to all the budget requests. You said, we're not sure to 75% of the requests you got. Why was that? What can you tell us about what kind of information are the boards not giving you that you would love them to know they should be including? And then we try to pull as much of that out as possible and circle it back to you guys. So feel like we're in the same boat, and I apologize to everybody who has felt that frustration. That I can promise you I've also felt that reading those responses where they just don't really give you that much is certainly the worst outcome, and we're doing our best to iron out as many of those wrinkles as we can.
So I have a question that's sort of a continuation of this. It's maybe what you've seen just over time as far as a more effective strategy to getting positive responses. And then also even maybe a balance of like, well, you don't necessarily need to get the positive response in that moment, but if you keep asking for it, eventually you'll get it. So realizing that, is there a strategy that you see that some boards use more effectively? You know, maybe going for a site-specific request primarily, as opposed to a district-wide one, which maybe because it's so huge, those would be more likely to be shut down. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think, well, some of it is the best practices I shared, that agencies tell us if something is site-specific, if you're clear about that and you give them the location information, that's always more helpful. When things are direct, the better they can understand what they're putting that price tag on, the better they can judge whether the price tag is reasonable for them to fit into their budget. So those are all the sort of the nitpicky items. Otherwise, it is tough to, I mean, I can't promise an outcome for anything, unfortunately, for sort of towards the last discussion about I can't be over their shoulder when they're responding. But I would say that probably the best thing that a board can do outside of just the way that they write their requests is, to the extent possible, making this sort of a year-long conversation. When a board submits a budget request list in October and then puts their pencils down and don't reach out to the agency, don't hear from the agency, and come back and do it again the next year, those months in between are time that, and we're more than happy to help put folks in contact. Actually, Lloyd, I just got a response back at the end of the day from FDNY, so I have somebody's contact info I can send you. Using those months in between to talk to someone from that agency about what was it about this request that didn't work. Is it that the idea can't happen ever? Is it that this is the wrong process for it? Should this have been a 311 request instead of a budget request? You know, where does this fit in your system? Making sure those conversations don't fall through the cracks in February only to reemerge unchanged in October, I think is the best sort of long-term vision for how to turn the needs statement from a snapshot every fall into a sort of year-long conversation that you're able to sort of move the needle a little bit, keep the ball rolling, as it were, with those agencies.
So, in this vein, and I will say, Meryl, I think you were being very diplomatic. And if I can remember correctly, the last couple of meetings that we've had, or that I've been at, where we were trying to figure out how to deal with the responses of the city and the rejections, I think we would have been actually kind of glad if it had actually said, contact us for further information, because we were thinking, because it didn't, and also sometimes we'd get a response that said, contact the proper agency, but not giving us any clue as to what that would be, and why we weren't really necessarily saying we want DOT to do this, you know, the request is we'd like this particular thing fixed or whatever, and then we just get back, contact the proper agency, things like that. So I guess what I'd like to get more clear for myself is, so we get something like this, we don't understand why we've been rejected, or we don't understand even what the proper agency would have been, or is, so who do we contact to get guidance on that?
I think your best bet would probably be a contact point at OMB. So they are, and it's certainly not 100% foolproof, but so we take all the you guys submit all the requests, we take that down and send it over to OMB for them to process, and then they run the website where the agencies log in and give their responses. While OMB is putting it all on their website, their task forces that are assigned to specific agencies are reviewing to see, oh, this one is actually, this project is being managed by DOT, not EDC, so we'll move it over there. And they catch some things and they don't catch other things, and the things that they don't catch, you get the response that this is the right agency, or in some cases, multiple agencies are co-managing a project, but the thing you've asked for is an EDC thing and not a DOT thing, and so it needs to get redirected. So I would say in those cases where something has made it out the other end that was identified as not for the right agency, O and B are usually the ones at the center looking out that could tell you, ooh, yeah, that one should probably go over there.
And how do we know, who to call at O and B?
I can definitely pass along the contact info for Tramell Thomas, is my sort of counterpart at OMB for their team that works on the flip side of the CD needs process. I'm not exactly sure what the name of his department is. I think he might be in their intergov office, but I can certainly pass along the name of the folks that I talked to.
Okay, so I guess you could get
Yeah.
it to the office.
Absolutely.
And I guess they can give it to you, Gina.
Yes, myself and Lloyd have been working with Nick, and actually we've been, able to get a number of contact, people to work with.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
I wanted to return to the capital and expense.
sure. You want to flip back to,
Not necessarily, just, you had said that if it's the same person that does it, and if it comes in as one, and it's not that one, and it goes into the other one, they just put it into the other one. So I guess if there is, if we do have something that's ambiguous, is there just one that we should just default to put it into that bucket?
I would say first, if you're sitting down, you're working on your budget request list, and you're really stuck on one that you're like, I can see this being capital or expense, first thing I would do would be email our team and see if one of us can just give you a quick answer on where to put it, because, case by case, there are some oddities that we might just be able to help figure out. If for some reason we also don't know the right answer, I do think that submitting it, even if it is in the wrong type category, at least somebody from the agency is gonna see that, who knows more about where it fits into their work program. And so certainly better to ask for help and submit it rather than, God forbid, leave it off because of some, drop down confusion over which thing to select. So, yeah.
Yeah, could we actually go back a few slides to
Sure.
the like hierarchy from least to most specific earlier on?
The least and most specific, oh, yes.
Close,
this-
yeah, right here. Thanks. So, like, as we can see here, right, like, we
Yeah.
start off with a district overview, and then we, consolidate into like 3 pressing issues, and we go down the
Mhm.
line. How is like that narrative portion in the overview, and then the top 3 pressing issues, and then the most important, like, how are those like interacted with?
Mhm.
Like, let's say I'm at FDNY.
Yeah.
And I'm like getting CB1's requests related to fire
Mhm.
and emergency stuff, right? Do they start from the community district overview and then read down to the 2 requests that are FDNY related, or do they go to the FDNY stuff and they skip the rest?
So 2 different ways that they interact with it. So in their workflow, they're seeing them in 2 different places because they're getting the login to OMB's system to input their responses to these. But the first thing that happens is that during that part of the year post-submission deadline, my team creates reports that splice out portions of this related to each policy area. So if you're FDNY, you don't need to flip through hundreds of pages of what every board in the city said about road resurfacing or whatever the case may be. And so I would take the top 3 pressing issues of only the boards that said something about FDNY's work. And I would take the most important issues for the policy area, public safety and emergency services that FDNY's in. And I would take any of the needs categories about public safety and emergency services, and I would give FDNY a report of just what every board said about things that FDNY cares about, to sort of save them the time of flipping through it. So they've got that with them around the same time that they're responding to budget requests. Then fast forward to this time of year, and I go back and our team schedules time with every agency that will have us, which is most of them. Usually in a year we're given 28 or 30 presentations to individual agency teams to say, we've combed through what all the boards have said about work related to your agency. Here's a map of every board that picked, for when I went to the Brooklyn office, Lucia and her team, their presentation about the same thing. We do it for all of our borough offices, all of Parks' borough offices, said here's what every board in the city said, or who picked land use and zoning as one of their top issues. Everyone that picked affordable housing is one of their top issues. Here are some snippets from what the boards that picked land use and zoning as their top issue said about land use and zoning. Here's the boards that changed their selection from last year. Last year it wasn't land use, and now it is land use and zoning. and here's what they dropped off their list to add that on. And so we go around to every agency one by one to say, we've done the work of combing through it for you. Here are some data, and please let us know if you want more than this. But here's what everybody has said as it relates to your work plan, so that you can then take that and hopefully for the rest of the year have that as one of your inputs when you're thinking about where certain services and certain investments are going.
Got it, that's
Yeah.
really helpful, Nick. And then so when we are writing the like top 3 pressing issues or
Mhm.
most important issues by policy area, we should be writing it fully knowing that agencies will only see the most relevant piece of that, if relevant at all.
They will see, because you're on for top 3 pressing issues and most important issue, you're making a selection and then explaining your selection. The needs group narratives are like everything else. So for instance, let's say your top 3 pressing issues were affordable housing, crime and public safety, and parks and open space were the top 3 that most selected in the city this past year. Then you get into the policy areas, and none of those were healthcare and human services, but everybody's got more than 3 problems, and so you still want to talk about problems 4 through 6 that didn't make it into the top 3. So now in your most important issues, you're able to say, healthcare and human services, we didn't get around, that wasn't in our top 3, but we still really care about senior services, so we're gonna talk about senior services. Now, let's say you've talked about your top 3 issues, senior services not in there, but you talked about senior services in most important issues by policy area, but you didn't get around to healthcare facilities, and you've got a huge healthcare facility issue. Needs categories are sort of the most specific level of in each of those policy areas. There's like 2 to 4, I think maybe 5 in one of them, different sub-categories to make sure that you've got some space for everything you might want to talk about. And each of those things are individually selected out to deliver to the agency to say, if it is needs for emergency services, that one's going to FDNY. So I would say, I think we're doing a lot of the sort of narrowing for you on the back end, that unless you're talking, you picked affordable housing for one of your top 3 pressing issues, and you're talking about fire stations in the affordable housing thing, they might not see that. But if you are making a selection that is related to public safety and emergency services, NYPD and FDNY are both gonna get that narrative, or whatever the agency example may be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question
Mhm.
about the priorities.
Yeah.
Now, you're saying it's gonna be different this year, that it will be within, agencies.
Yeah.
So let's say we have transportation, for example. You're allowed to go like from 1 to 10, from 1 to 40, and then you go to parks. They can go from 1 to 10, 1 to 40, like how much?
I wouldn't
what
recommend
is that?
having 40 per agency, 40 per agency.
Okay, so
The
how-
general
how-
guidelines that the OMB has given over the years is 45 capital total.
That's what
and,
I understand.
Or sorry, yeah, 45 capital total and 25 expense total. Those are not hard limits. The charter mandate is a sort of reasonable number
Around
of requests.
40.
Yeah, but that is the and it varies quite a bit. There are boards I can think of that have 12 requests total, all considered. Another board I can think of has 120, all considered. It runs the whole gamut. We recommend that you land somewhere in sort of the 60s
Yeah, okay.
total, and I think you guys do.
60s, Yeah, we are within, around 60.
Yeah, between the 45 capital, 20
Between
expense,
capital and
and
expenses,
expense
about
combined.
60.
Yeah.
So how does so they still have the opportunity to go and prioritize them? So
Yeah.
let's say 10 for this group,
Mhm.
10 for that group, like, let's say
Yeah.
you have parks, you have transportation, you have safety. We have education. We're all gonna have a number
Mhm.
of district needs.
Yeah.
But we wanna keep it within a certain number.
Yeah, so it'll be, instead of in a previous year, you would say, here's my one list of capital requests, and it's number 1 priority through number 45 priority, and everything's competing for a spot. Now it is, here are my capital requests for DOT, numbers 1 through 4. Here are my capital requests for parks, numbers 1 through 4. And so parks will know which parks request you
Okay,
care
I
about
see.
more or less than another park might care about, which is a higher priority than another parks request. But parks is only seeing parks requests when they're answering. So if you had done your whole request list and spent a long time trying to decide whether this one parks was 23 and DOT was 24,
Oh,
or
that
the other way
was-
around,
oh, wow,
they were
that was
only
so
seeing
difficult,
they were only
yeah.
seeing theirs anyway.
Mhm.
And so we figured this is a lot of trouble for the board to figure out what belongs in what order. It's the agencies are only seeing the ones they're getting anyway. Let's clear the fog and just give the agencies a list that is relevant to their work so that they know. And this, again, it is rarely that an agency has, I've got this many millions of dollars waiting to work on these projects, and I just need to know which one Brooklyn One cares more about, and I'll give that one the money. It's, rarely do they have, that sort of decision to be made. They're more likely just considering each request kind of on its own merit. But should there be a situation, let's say you had 2 requests that were for the same thing, but at 2 different locations, and one of them you put as a higher request and say, this is a higher priority because even whatever the request might be, this particular intersection needs repairing much worse than the other one for reasons X, Y, and Z, you can still give that nuance of one being a higher priority than the other so that the agency can understand where the biggest need is, even if they're not necessarily, picking and playing favorites for, well, they said this is more important, so that's where we're gonna fund it or whatever.
Supporters, as part of a submission, can you speak about that a little bit more? I guess maybe the extent to which y'all investigate the supporter, if it's not one that you're familiar with, and maybe some examples of supporters that are weighted more. So like,
Yeah, so I wouldn't say there's any sort of weighting system. It's really, and this is one of the features that we kind of inherited when our team took this over a few years ago, that historically people have, there has been a desire to, for particular requests, include, we have a letter from our council member about how they're also in support of this, or we have a Friends at the Park group that we work with that this was an idea that they've spent a lot of time rallying around, and you want their letter or whatever the case may be also sent to the agency so that they can see the board's not just the only one asking for this, there's also support from X or Y or Z, then you have the option to do so. Similarly, we also last year added the feature where for every one of these narrative sections and the budget requests, there's an open file upload where you can upload whatever supporting documentation you want to attach to it, and we send that over in those reports we give to the agencies. So it's more of a giving the opportunity for the board to include things that they think would be helpful to that particular audience, and less that if you include this type of supporter, that's your ticket in or whatever. Yeah.
And so the format that we're gonna be dealing with this year is very different, right? This is a completely different format?
So
And is it online?
Yeah, so there's a submission website that we actually rolled out a new website last year. And this is just, we've made some tweaks to that same website that we rolled out last year. So the format for the budget request page will look basically the same, but instead of one long list, there'll be a header for each agency that you have a request for, and you'll sort them under the agency header instead of as one long list. Otherwise, the rest of the format is the same as last year. That's really the only major visual difference. But also, again, I'll plug that we'll be doing trainings through the summer. So even if you're curious, you want to tag along to sort of see what the website looks like, even if you're not one of the folks that'll be typing stuff in or whatever, we're happy to show a demo of kind of here's what it looks like, here's what to expect. It's sort of like you get to one homepage and it's got a list of all the sections, and you click on a button for which section you want to work on. Then it takes you to that page. You update your description of, we're going to change one of our top issues from this to this, type in why we're changing our top issue, click save, it brings you back to the main menu with all the options for what you want to work on next. And we hope that it's as straightforward as we tried to make it. Yeah.
I have a question regarding the city's assessment and the process and the resources. Let's say we have a great idea and we think that EDC should take a look at it, but who's laying out the path to it? Like, let's say the idea will require additional studies, like, I don't know, NEPA or zoning analysis. And you would have to, or agency will have to write an RFP for it, hire a consultant. Is that something that we have to write about and kind of lay out this process? Because we know it's not the final product, right? But the final product is this, but in order to get to that, you need to go through various steps, right? So is that something that you help with, or we have to do our own research?
The general assumption is that those details about planning and implementation for a project are just kind of the agency's wheelhouse. that if you told them, this is what our community needs, and we really think that this is the thing we would like the agency to focus on, and let's say in a perfect world, you bring this idea to EDC and they're like, that's a great idea, we just got funding for that, we're gonna do it.
Okay.
The rest is up to them to figure out. You are just there to identify the need that your community has agreed to present to them, and they figure out the rest. Similarly for price, because of the similarities to participatory budgeting and the people's money, we'll see some folks will include price estimates in their budget request. That's not necessary. The agency is gonna do their own kind of evaluation of what things cost anyway. So you need not justify that you expect a certain ticket item for a specific request. The agency sort of handles all the.
So the focus is on the final goal of.
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the-
it's at the end of the day, it is a needs assessment. You are a statement of your district's needs. And the getting you to that final goal is the agency's job.
Yeah.
And you're just pointing out sort of what direction you'd like them to take.
And you pick the agency that will be responsible for it, right?
You would pick what agency you're sending that individual request to. And then like I mentioned earlier, if there's a different managing agency for a particular project or whatever the case may be, OMB has task forces that are diverting those. But generally speaking, as you create a budget request, you would go, all right, I know that this is a parks need, I'm gonna pick parks, or I know that this is a sanitation need, I'm gonna pick sanitation, and there's all sorts of different request types that you can get more specific on exactly what type of service from sanitation that you
Okay,
want
got it.
filed under, yeah.
Do any committee chairs or committee members have, any questions about like rule of thumb, or like, let's say like transportation, like what are other things that like would be good to know about transportation related requests, right? Or for environmental requests, that have been successful, like what are important things for us to know, or like ways that agency operates that's different from other ones, right? So maybe some of the things come to mind.
I'll have Giovanni. Giovanni's
So
the
I was
chair of-
late, I'm sorry.
No problem.
He's the chair of education.
Oh, great.
Co-chair of education,
Co-chair.
chair of veterans. So for the education, like a school-specific request would be easier than saying, let's say, the district needs, I don't know, $1 million to fix the playgrounds.
Mhm.
Is it better to present it as a school-specific request? Or should it be like just a blanket of, we have X amount of schoolyards in the district, they should all get repaired?
Yeah, I would say that the latter, the description of here is the situation, playgrounds in our district, is what you would describe in your narratives. So you would get to the section of the narratives that's needs for parks or needs for youth welfare, or whatever the case may be, and say, our district is lacking in park space for youth. Here are some stats on how many parks we have and why that need is not sufficient. And then in the budget request, you could say, this particular playground has not been renovated in a certain amount of time, we're requesting a renovation. And so you're able to describe the need itself, the context of the issue in your narrative, and then the budget request is okay, but what do you want the agency to do about that context you
And
just
it's more
described?
site specific.
It can be, yeah. I think there are certainly people that submit requests, there are certainly boards, plenty of requests come in that are not about a thing with an address, and that's also perfectly fine. It's a little harder for the agency to give if you just told an agency like our whole district needs more playgrounds, end of request, there's a little less for them to latch onto to give you a yes or no, because how do you know, what does that look like? What are you imagining? What kind of improvements, new playgrounds or repaired playgrounds? And so the more specific you can be in the request, the more specific a response could feasibly be. And then the needs areas, the narratives are really the better location to go into the deeper detail about what's the story of parks in this neighborhood, what's the story of playgrounds in this neighborhood, whatever the case is. Lloyd, to your point, I'll add just sort of off the top of my head, other things we've heard from agencies, and every year we also circulate with the agencies, like, please tell us if you have any feedback you want us to give back to the boards, tips, tricks, rules of thumb, please do. And so we're working on compiling as much of that as possible for an updated one. I think I sent you guys the one we had from last year. We're trying to add to that. Some things like parks preferring, like I mentioned in that example, if you've got multiple things you're asking for, to break those into different requests instead of lumping 10 different fixes into 10 different repairs into one request. Parks tends to prefer that. HPD gets a lot of requests that they struggle because their funding sources operate on a different timeline than the city's budget timeline, because they work with a lot of federal grant funding. And so when they're responding to your budget request, are in a different part of the funding cycle than the city is, because the city's budget runs on a different calendar than the federal budget. So that's sort of an expectation setting when you're asking for an HPD request, is that that's likely to need a follow-up when it's an HPD capital request, because their funding is not yet secured. SBS, on the other hand, small business services, often work with large amounts of grant funding for programs that they do have a lot available, and are often looking for community organizations to partner with. So SBS is usually the agency that gives out the most yeses every year. It's not to say that anything you ask them for, they'll say yes to, but a observation from us that SBS typically has a bit more flexibility to work with that grant funding. Any other rules of thumb? DOT requests, if it feels like it's small scale, like a pothole, or that's an example people throw out a lot, is like it should be a 311 request. But DOT has a system called ARTS that, for the life of me, I could not remember what those letters all stand for. But they have their own system online where you can submit a request similar to a budget request, and it'll add a point on a map. You can also look at the map to see what requests are already in progress, and look at their status, when they were requested, what DOT decided to do about them. And they prefer that a lot of those smaller scale, specific, I noticed this thing on my block types of requests for DOT go through that instead of through this, because they can get to them faster than waiting until next December to respond to it. So that's another rule of thumb for DOT. That's all that's coming to mind right now, but we'll definitely follow up when we get more info. Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve. We'll second.
Thanks. In regards to a request for a study, like for instance, like under environmental, and we wanted a storm risk management plan, a resiliency plan for a district and we're surrounded by water. So would that fall in the realm of expense or capital, or it's kind of in that gray area, I guess?
So that would be an expense request, because what the issue that you might run into is whether that agency has staff capacity to commit to resources to the study. So it's less about you're not investing in repairing a staircase or something where you're putting anything in the ground. You're just asking the agency to use its staff in a certain way, which is a sort of programmatic request. So that would be an expense request.
A couple of issue statements. First, confirming, which is that SBS as the retired staff member
Oh,
from
great.
SBS. That is true, that statement you made. I know the environmental as well as transportation becomes an issue of jurisdiction. I had a lot of neighbors complaining about underneath the BQE on Baker Avenue, not sufficient lighting, but it's attached to BQE, it's a state, it's not the city.
Yeah.
And for us, we got the super funds and other issues, environmental, we're dealing with federal and state.
Yeah.
And sometimes it wasn't made clear to us that we were addressing it to the wrong agency. So that's one thing we learned.
That's a good note. I would say especially with the funding coming from different sources like that, and possible that our agency partners might have a different answer to this, I would argue if the agency is doing work related to that thing, even if the funding is coming from a state or federal source, we would still want you to tell the agency you guys have that problem, even if the funding is not, strictly speaking, these budget requests are meant to be requests for the agency to consider how they could use their own city funding in the next fiscal year. That's sort of the by the book definition here. And so if something were federally funded, an agency wouldn't be wrong in saying, thank you for the budget request, this is federally funded, so it isn't really meant here. It's a needs assessment. You should tell an agency about a problem you have that their services will help remedy. And so I would say that can be frustrating when you submit something and they tell you like, well, this is federal funding. I would say there's still a place for it, and it might not be helpful to get that response from the agency, but knowing that might be the case, if you still want to use your needs statement as a way to broadcast, we know that it's federal funding, we know that you can't give us a clean yes and pull the money out of your back pocket, we still want to put it in here because it's important to us. I would say put it in there because it's important to you. and good to hear that I'm right about SBS. It would have been
It's
terrible to
funding.
find out you had
A
a.
lot of the funds are not from government, they're private
Mhm. Yeah.
corporations, so that gives us, the agency, the flexibility.
And I think we're nearing 8 o'clock. Any other questions, or? And we will probably look forward again to inviting you for
Absolutely.
for other presentations, and perhaps if you have ideas of additional presentations you would like, you can let me know, and we can schedule as we go
Certainly.
along. So we are now starting the beginning process, and
Yeah,
this is
so
the outreach.
we will be, now granted, we've already been in contact with you guys for a while now, you'll get our kickoff email, not that
We're in
long
the
from now,
kickoff process
into
now.
May, to say like, hey guys, for the other boards that have not reached out to us in January to start working on things, and remind them of what services that we can help assist them with, stuff like that. So yeah, we're about to kick into kind of our early window support period for, yeah.
Oh,
I guess that's one more just process question on the timeline.
Yeah.
In terms of, the board's draft or submission and the OMB Borough budget consultations.
Yeah.
Are those kind of happening in parallel, or are they sort of,
Yeah, so I guess it depends on how the board kind of allots when it does different parts of its update. I would say a lot of boards do, they go into that OMB Borough budget consultation with a little bit of an idea of what their submission's gonna look like, and they're going to get some clarity from agencies so that they can put a bow on it and click submit. Other boards, maybe that's the first time they feel comfortable thinking about new budget priorities is when they hear from the agency, and so they wait and put more of it past that. I think it does vary a lot. The individual process varies quite a bit board to board. I would say our recommendation is usually that if there is content from your prior submission that you can freshen up